Well, hello, and welcome again to another installment of Economics with Tully. This is Thom Simmons, otherwise known as Tully, and this series of videos that we've created has been an attempt to take textbook economic principles, macro and microeconomics, kind of translate them into regular guy-on-the-street type of language to try and make economics a little more understandable to the average person. This is the 6th video in the series that we're making. Videos 1 through 4 have dealt with consumer behavior and trying to explain how and why consumers act the way they do. Video 5 dealt with the nature of the cost structure of individual businesses. In this video, video number 6, we're going to be addressing the concept of supply, which is the second half of that supply and demand equation that most economists speak of so freely. And then in our next video, video number 7, we're actually going to take supply and demand, those two concepts, and put them together, putting them using a whiteboard and showing the student how to actually create the graphs, use them, and interpret them. But for this video, number 6, we're going to stick just with an overview of the nature of supply. And as we do this, we're really going to cover 3 overall points. And so I will state them now and then go into each of them in a little more detail. First of all, when we talk about supply, it is extremely important to remember that we're not talking about a single store, a single retail outlet, a single supplier or seller of a good or service. It is the total supply. That's the first important principle to understand. Second, just as demand represents what consumers would like to purchase, or would like to obtain at different price levels, supply represents what suppliers are willing and able to supply at different price levels. Supply is not what is actually sold. That's the second critical point. And the third critical point when understanding supply is that supply is different from demand in a few critical aspects, but maybe one of the most important being that supply involves a chain of businesses involved in getting a good from the raw material stage all the way to the retail level. And that has ramifications for when both consumers and producers wish to move in a market, but suppliers have to deal with a full chain and consumers do not. So those are the 3 concepts we're going to cover in this video. So, first, as I stated before, there are many suppliers, and when we talk about the market supply of a good, or the amount of supply in a market, it is the total amount of that good, not what exists in one store. So for instance, if there are 3 drugstores in town selling suntan lotion, CVS has 10 bottles on the shelf, and Duane Reade has 10 bottles on the shelf, and Rite Aid has 10 bottles on the shelf. It's critical to understand that in this market, 30 bottles of that suntan lotion are available on the market. It's not an average of the 3 companies. It wouldn't be 10 or some other odd approach. It is adding together all of a particular product that is available for sale out there in the marketplace. So in the example I just gave you, the total supply is 30. And here's where this becomes important. Sometimes students will get confused because it will be proposed that, let's say, a 4th drugstore moves into this town and decides to carry the same suntan lotion. And we'll ask the question, so does this increase or decrease the supply of suntan lotion on the market? Some students get confused with, well, I don't know if it's going to mean more cells or not. Not the question. The question is the total amount of supply on the market. Another student might get a little confused because they'll say, well, if consumers used to buy from 3 different stores and now they're buying from 4 different stores, doesn't that mean each store will sell less, so supply is actually less or will drop? Again, that's confusing what's happening in a single store with the total market supply. If a 4th store moves into the neighborhood and is also supplying that product, that is an addition to supply. Here's another way to think of it. Let's say you have one pizza parlor on the main street in your hometown. There's a certain amount of pizzas that they can produce in the course of a day. They're limited by the size of their ovens, by the size of the pies they make, and by the amount of time it takes to make a pie, and by the number of hours they're open. And at some point they max out the number of pies they could actually make. If a second pizza parlor moves into town and provides competition, it is true that the first pizza parlor may sell a little less, but it is also true that the total amount of pizza available to the market has increased, and this would represent an increase in supply. So, please do not think of how purchases are divided among individual stores when you're thinking about supply. In fact, do not think of individual stores at all. When we speak of market supply, we speak of the total amount of the good or the service available on the market by taking all of the suppliers and adding them up together. So that's the first important point to understand. And when these retail outlets supply this good, let's also understand that there is a close relationship between price and quantity, just as there is with demand. If you've seen my demand video, you know that there is this very close inverse relationship between consumers and the amount of a good they will buy and the price of that good. As the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded of that good decreases. And as the price of a good decreases, the quantity demanded of that good increases. You can see that anytime something on the store goes on sale and consumers begin to buy more of it or stock up on it because they see it's a really good deal. And of course the store is doing that because they want to move that product out of there. So consumers react to price by wishing to buy more when price falls and fewer when price rises. Suppliers are the exact opposite. Now, individual suppliers may have their own little idiosyncrasies and contracts and desires to carry things, and they may price things differently. But as a general rule, there is also a relationship between supply as a whole and price levels. When the price of a good increases because consumers are willing to pay a higher price for that good, then suppliers are willing to supply more of that good. Technically, the quantity supplied will increase, and that's a technical term we use for that. Quantity supplied, a change in quantity supplied, is what happens when there's a change in price. Think of it this way. If a store knows they can get a higher and higher price for something, and let's hold all other variables constant, that means their profit margin is going to be higher for that good. So why not bring more into the store, try and market it a little more, try and make a bigger display of it, really push it, because they're making a bigger profit on it. On the other hand, if the price of that good falls, if consumers say, oh, I'm not going to buy that at that price, if they decide to purchase something else that they think is a better value, then producers are not going to want to carry a whole lot of that on their shelves. It's taking up valuable shelf space that can be used to sell something that's going to make them a bigger profit. Why should they use up their shelf space carrying something that's only giving them pennies of profits, if anything at all? So for suppliers, Yes, there's a relationship between price and the quantity supplied, but it's the total opposite of what we see with consumers. For suppliers, as the price increases, the quantity supplied also increases. And as the price decreases, the quantity supplied also decreases. So, that's point one. Many suppliers reacting to price changes. Point number two is to remind you that what suppliers are willing and able to supply is not what is actually sold. Critical point here. What actually trades hands in the marketplace is something called the equilibrium quantity. That's a different concept. That's video 7. What we are speaking about when we talk about supply is the amount that suppliers are willing and able to put out for consumption at every price level. Think of it in terms of the capacity or the willingness of producers to actually make this good available to the public for sale at different price levels. Because we've just stated, at lower price levels, they're less willing to take up store space for that good. At higher price levels, they're willing to make a whole display and really push it and make it a big part of their store. So, keep separate the concept of supply and what consumers actually purchase or what stores actually sell. That's a different concept. Now, third, and the one that will take up most of this video, is looking at the nature of the supply chain and how suppliers make decisions as to what to get out on the market and not. As we've just stated, there is this close relationship between price and quantity. However, there are other reasons why producers are willing or unwilling to put certain amounts of goods out for sale unrelated to a change in price. And these phenomenon are called the determinants of supply. Now, there are also determinants of demand. There are reasons that consumers will go out and buy things unrelated to a change in price because of something being a new fad or a new season, or they've had a sudden increase in income or decrease in income. Well, suppliers react to some of the same forces, some of the same phenomenon. For instance, if there's, as we previously stated, if there is an increase in the number of suppliers, then whatever product it is that they are supplying, there will be an increase of that supply to the market, at least in the short term. However, if a supplier goes out of business or closes up shop and moves away, there is a decrease in the supply of that good to the market. But since we're speaking about supply, it's not just the retail store. Because when we speak of supply, think of all the steps it takes to get a tomato from growing in the ground, or growing on a plant that's planted in the ground, to the can of tomato sauce that you had in a restaurant, or on some home spaghetti that you cooked. The farmer is in the supply chain, and the labor he employs, and the machinery he employs, and then the truck he uses to get it to a factory where it is rendered and mixed with all other ingredients and turned into paste and then loaded on trucks, and there's trucking companies involved, and that goes to a wholesale warehouse where it's then stacked and then unstacked and then loaded to go into new trucks to go out to supermarkets. It takes a long time to get that tomato from farm to table in the normal course of corporate events in the larger markets. Obviously, it's a lot different than if you just go to the farm yourself. That means, however, that a change in the number of suppliers anywhere in that chain can affect the ultimate supply. If a trucking company, if the labor at a trucking company goes on strike, if a farmer sells his farm, a large farmer sells his farm for a housing development, If a wholesale warehouse is suddenly unable to provide tomatoes because a government health agency found salmonella in that warehouse, supply is restricted. We will see when we look at how we graph this, supply shifts to the left or decreases because of any little chink in that supply chain. That's one determinant of supply, the number of suppliers. Another one is cost. If suppliers' costs increase, but they're only getting the same price for that good, boy, they're not going to be very willing to get that out on the shelf or to give much shelf space to it. In fact, chances are they may have to bump it up, that price, a little bit, and they're going to end up losing some sales as a result. So when the cost to suppliers increases, there is usually also a decrease in the supply of that good to the market because of all of the steps that follow. And again, that cost could come from the farmer, it could come from fertilizer companies, it could come from trucking companies, it could come from wholesalers, it could come from the retail end, anywhere in that chain. There are two phenomena that are very closely related to the phenomenon of cost. One of them is government regulation. For good or for bad, whether you like government regulations or not, the reality is government enacts regulations that cause businesses to engage in cost, to engage in activities that they probably would not normally do on their own. And it means more labor or more paperwork or more technology that's required to fix something. It's an increase in cost. So you can assume almost all the time when there is a new government regulation on a business in the production of its good or service, that is an increase in cost, which results in a decrease in the total supply of that good. Conversely, new technology that the business is adopting voluntarily because they see that it's going to help them in their business has the opposite effect. It actually has a decrease in their costs. Even though they might be purchasing equipment up front and laying out cash, in the long run, a business only adopts technology when it believes that it's going to make their operation more efficient, more cost-effective. So, while they may be laying out some capital expenditures to acquire new technology, if it's making their business more cost-efficient, then it's the equivalent of a lowering of cost, a decrease in cost, which increases supply. Suppliers can now get the same amount of goods or more goods out on the market faster, cheaper, more quickly, and in so doing, and hopefully in selling that, increase their profits. Another determinant of supply, which will affect how much of a good or service that suppliers put out onto the market, are the issues of seasonality and suppliers' expectations about the future. Every February in New York City is Fashion Week, and all of the fashion designers have their models wear the upcoming clothes as they walk down the runway, and many of the fashion houses are looking to purchase these designs. These are not designs for spring. These are designs for the fall that are coming down the runway in February. The industry is anticipating, everyone in the industry is anticipating what's going to happen in the fall. What is the style going to be? What are the colors going to be? And so they begin working on the fall all the way back in the spring. And that's true for most businesses. Even in the summer, they're thinking, what am I going to have to have in stock for my fall or winter sales? And again, that's because of the nature of the supply chain. They can't just snap their fingers and have something appear. They've got to order it. And because suppliers act on their expectations, they may have less or more of a particular good in the store because they know that the next thing is coming soon. For instance, if a software company is coming out real soon with version 25.5 of some program, then computer stores may begin to carry fewer and fewer copies of version 25.0 because they know a new one is coming out soon. And once the new version comes out, once the new software package comes out, those stores will not be able to unload the older version. So they don't stock up on it because they expect a new version is coming out. And finally, suppliers will supply more or less of a good to a market is when a business believes that they can make a higher profit in an alternative venture. Let's say we have a tuna fish company, and our trucks meet the fishing boats out at a dock, and we move the fish into our refrigerator trucks, and we bring it back to the factory, and we chop up the fish, and we make it into tuna fish, and we put it into little tin cans, and we slap labels on it, and then we put it back in the trucks, and it goes out to the stores. Supply chain. But let's decide, let's presume that we figure out that we can make a higher profit, maybe charge a higher price and make a higher profit if we make cat food instead of tuna fish for human consumption. We have all the equipment in place. We have the networks in place. We can still meet the fishing boats, get the fish, chop it up, put it in a can, slap a label on it, and get it out to the stores. If we, as a supplier, decide that we can make a higher profit in an alternative venture with very little additional expenditure of capital to do so, then we'll probably provide less and less tuna fish to the market and more cat food. So here's an area where the supply of tuna fish may shrink or may decrease, not because the price of tuna fish has changed, but because we figured out, and other suppliers in the industry have figured out, that we can make more profit selling it as cat food instead of as human food. So, the reason we go through these determinants is because they all affect how much of a good is on the market. One really important thing to understand here is that if suppliers change the number of goods they provide to the market because the price that they're receiving for that good has changed, we call that a change in quantity supplied. And when we graph a supply curve, which I will show you how to do in video 7, the supply curve remains valid, and we simply read the supply curve. It tells us what's happening. On the other hand, if suppliers change the number of goods they have available for sale, not because of a price change, but because the determinants have changed, their costs of creating the good have changed. Regulation, technology has changed. Their expectations have changed. The number of suppliers has changed. They believe they can make a higher profit elsewhere. Anytime these non-price phenomenon change, and suppliers change what they make available to the market, that is called a change in supply itself. Change in price leads to a change in quantity supplied. Change in determinants leads to a change in supply itself. And whatever graph we drew from the information we had about where the supply curve lands on a supply and demand graph is no longer valid. The supply has shifted. And if the supply shifts in such a way that more of the good is available to the market, that means the supply curve has shifted to the right. More supply to the right. There's a mnemonic for you. If supply has changed so that less of the good is now available to the market, it means that supply curve has shifted left. Less left, more right. Never up and down. I implore you, as a student of economics, to eradicate the words up and down from your vocabulary. They will only confuse you. Demand curves shift right and left in response to determinants of demand, and supply curves shift left and right in response to changes in determinants of supply. So, there are our 3 main points that I really wanted to drive home today on this concept of supply. Number 1, We're talking the total supply to the market, not what happens in an individual store. Number 2, supply is what suppliers are willing to make available for purchase, not what is actually purchased. Number 3, supply is different, especially in the fact that suppliers must deal with a chain of suppliers, whereas consumers simply make a decision and execute it. And that is why, if there is a storm about to hit, and all the weather radios are saying big blizzard or big hurricane about to hit, both the consumer and the producer hear this news at the same time. Both of them know, there's going to be a run on batteries and flashlights and paneling and all sorts of emergency supplies. But the consumer hears the news, it changes their expectations, they immediately decide, I better get some flashlights and batteries, and then they execute their decision. They go to the store. The supplier, on the other hand, cannot say, we're going to need more flashlights and more batteries, snap their fingers, and have it magically appear in the store. It doesn't work that way. They often have to call up a corporate office, who has to call up a wholesaler, who has to get more from from a manufacturer. As a result, when both sides, supply and demand, hear the news of an impending storm, even though they both hear it at the same time, the consumer acts first, the consumer goes to the store, buys everything off the shelf. And the supplier, even though they know they could sell more, they expect there's going to be increased demand for this good. They can't get the supply to the shelf because of the supply chain problem. So, that is an overview of supply. If you haven't seen our demand videos, I highly recommend them so you get the other side of this equation, and then move on to video number 7, which will take information from both supply and demand, and using a whiteboard and some graphs, we will discuss how you actually model changes in these phenomenons, like the number of suppliers or the number of consumers changing, and its effect on the marketplace. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.